Welcome to Faithful Witness of Terrance Carroll. I'm Terrance Carroll, an ordained Baptist preacher, public theologian, lawyer, and former Speaker of the Colorado House of Representatives. Faithful Witness is grounded in the prophetic tradition of the Black church. And each week, we explore the moral questions shaping our society, culture, and democracy. This week, I'm happy to have on Hetal Doshi, who's running for Colorado Attorney General. Hetal's a former federal prosecutor, lifelong public servant, whose commitment to public service is rooted and grounded as someone who was born of immigrant parents, lived in the Deep South. In fact, she was born and raised in the cradle of the Civil Rights Movement in Birmingham, Alabama. Today, we'll talk about how all those things influenced her and encouraged her to fight for the least of these, those people who live on the margins of society. So I'm happy to have Hetal on to talk about her candidacy. I want to warn you all that we had some technical difficulties this week, and so things will be a little bit more scatterbrained, at least on the technology and the video production. But thanks for watching, and I'm glad that you're here. And now to this week's episode of Faithful Witness with Terrance Carroll. I want to welcome Hetal Doshi, who's a candidate for Attorney General of the great state of Colorado, to the Faithful Witness with Terrance Carroll podcast. She might be the first candidate for office. I think she is the first candidate for office and future Attorney General ever to be on the Faithful Witness podcast. Full transparency. I endorsed Hetal from early on because I actually think I was number one, probably number two after Juanita Chacon, but I like to think that I was still number one of podcast host. That's what I'm going to go with, that I was number one. And after our brief conversation today, we don't have it for long because as this is being recorded, this is the day before the Colorado primaries. Tomorrow, June 30th, around 7:30, we should know. And I feel good about having good news. But I wanted to have Hetal on. We've been trying to do this for weeks and weeks and weeks to talk about her candidacy, what motivates her, why she wanted to get into this race. Hetal, welcome to Faithful Witness with Terrance Carroll. How are you today?
I'm great. There's so much to respond to there, Speaker Carroll. I can't believe that I'm your first political candidate on here. And listen, you're always the number one, so we don't have to talk about all the others, but you were a day one supporter, and I'm really, really grateful. And grateful for all the other folks that showed up on that day as well. But lovely to be here. Let's get into it.
Okay, Hetal, I'm OG Hetal to the metal. Now you heard it here first. I'm OG Hetal to the metal. I'm not a newfound person. I was Hetal before Hetal was cool.
Yes, this is all true. This is all true. But if you start to then try to get me to endorse your alma mater for college over my own down the street, then we're going to have problems.
This is how we're going to back into this then. Hetal went to Emory, which is down the street from Morehouse. Emory does this thing, Morehouse does this thing. But at the end of the day, Morehouse is the legendary institution. We are the college. But we won't hold that against Hetal. What motivated you to get into public service and all the things that you've done? The U.S. Attorney's Office, the Department of Justice, and now running for Attorney General for the state of Colorado.
So I think that where I grew up and how I grew up is really formative to shaping how I found my way to public service. I am the proud product of a public education all across the Deep South, but primarily in Alabama, where I grew up about 90 miles from Selma and grew up in the cradle of the civil rights movement. I am a first-generation American. I'm the proud daughter of two immigrants whose story is very much the story of the American dream. Both of my parents came to America with very little other than big dreams about possibility and hope for a better future for their families. And they actually met and fell in love in America and got married. And, my dad didn't ever get to realize his dream of going to medical school because he had a young family to take care of. And so growing up where I did and how I did in terms of understanding and really appreciating from the inside what it means to be a working family in America today, but also navigating what it meant to be a person of color who was neither black nor white in a place like Alabama, just really mapped onto my heart, and I understood from a very, very early age that my path was going to look a little bit different and that there were so many things that were promised under American law in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights that had yet to make its way to the lived realities of the people that I grew up with, whether it was in South Georgia or in Alabama. And so I found my way to being the first lawyer in my family, first of a lot of things, but first lawyer in public service specifically, because I saw that there was such a big divide between the law as it's engraved on buildings and written in books and the lived experience that we all have. And so that's what took me to public service, is to fight for that better future.
Thank you. One of my favorite quotes is from Dr. King. He says that all we're asking is for America to be true to what she says she is on paper. I kind of paraphrased it, but that's the gist of the quote. So I've had the opportunity to meet your parents. Love them, by the way. Tell them I said hello.
I
Absolutely
will. They're
adore
going to
them.
make a, full Indian meal for you, Terrance, if you express too much love for them. So bring your appetite.
Well, I'm gonna have to like I love them dearly. And you grew up in Birmingham, thereabouts, and Birmingham, as you said earlier, and Alabama as a whole is a cradle of the civil rights movement. Growing up, especially in Birmingham, around the corner, figuratively, from the 16th Street Baptist Church, the park where Bull Connor let loose dogs on those children, how does that form your view of what the role of the attorney general should be?
I think I come to this from the really foundational perspective, which is the role of the state's top lawyer, the top law enforcement officer, is to fight for people under the law, right? And so, there's a story about a former attorney general of Alabama, speaking of the 16th Street Baptist Church, that maybe it's legend, maybe it's not, but I think it's worth sharing here, which is Bill Baxley, when he became the Attorney General of Alabama many, many years ago, he said that he took office and campaigned on the idea that he wanted to find those who were responsible for the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing and killing those young girls, those little girls who were in Sunday school. That's what he wanted to do as Attorney General. He wanted to find justice for them. And he did. And one of the things that he did was to make sure that the FBI and other state law enforcement agencies that he could work with followed every single lead. And he took a lot of heat for it. In fact, he got a lot of hate mail. And one of the pieces of hate mail that he got was from someone who purported to be a doctor, I think it was Dr. Fields, who called him a N lover and a disgrace to his race and all of the other things. This was Attorney General Baxley. And, not knowing as much about the rest of Attorney General Baxley's legacy, I will tell you this. He got a demand that he respond to that letter from the so-called doctor, Dr. Fields, who was actually like very senior in white nationalist organizations, maybe including also the KKK. And he responded and he said, "Dear," and then scare quotes, "Dr. Fields, my response to your letter dated whatever is kiss my ass. Sincerely, Bill Baxley, Attorney General of the state of Alabama." I think about that letter a lot for a lot of different reasons, not just because it's important for our public servants to really be steadfast no matter how much personal abuse or threats they get in terms of executing the duties of their office, but also because sometimes it's important to just be plain spoken and keep it real in terms of answering the call that you get when you're being criticized, right? And so growing up in a place like Alabama in the environment that you've described, Terrance, is, there's so much to say, but perhaps it's really reduced down to this, which is I have a very clear appreciation. And I love that quote from Dr. King, but you put it on paper, right? Like, I think that's what he said. You put it on paper and we're just asking you for you to keep your promise. That is my lived reality. That is what I have chased in my, years in public service on behalf of the American people and the people of Colorado, is to say, if we have two systems of justice, who operates those systems of justice and how do we do something to reform that and refine it from the inside? That has been my work, and that's why I became a white-collar criminal prosecutor in particular, because I saw that our criminal justice system was very, very good at holding those with the least amount of power in society to account. poor people, often communities of color, Black and Brown communities. But when it came to taking on those who had the most power and privilege and resources and powerful allies, right? Like I'm thinking about Tina Peters,
Right.
we have a really hard time having the institutional will and the resources and people willing to step up and take on those fights. And that's why I found myself at the Department of Justice taking on the kinds of cases that I did because I wanted to use whatever limited talents that I had been given, skills and talents to that purpose.
It's not lost on me that when you're elected attorney general, that you will be housed in the Ralph Carr building. And again, full disclosure, I was the one who had the building named the Ralph Carr Building for a particular reason, because I sponsored the bill to create the Justice Center and the History of Colorado building. And when we're looking for a name, Ralph Carr came to mind, famous governor of Colorado who stood up against those who were bigots and xenophobes during World War II and objected to Japanese internment both here in Colorado and nationally, and paid a dear political price for that over at the end of his as part of his political career. I take the position that anyone who serves in office, especially when you have served in office when your job is to protect the rule of law and to stand up for the rule of law, that's what you do, and you're willing to take those types of risk. So this is a direct question on this one is, you know, are you willing to take those risks, political risks, to stand up for the rule of law in the state of Colorado?
Yes. And first, I should say thank you for your service in co sponsoring that legislation. I think that that's an incredible part of your legacy, right? That you don't need me to tell you to be proud of, but I hope you are. It's really important. But yes, not only am I willing to do it in the future, I have done it before. Part of my work has been to do public corruption prosecution, right? So I've investigated Democrats and Republicans. And in addition to that, when you take on some of the world's most powerful companies, the CEOs are standing behind Elon Musk at inauguration. When you take on those companies in court and, have it such that their CEOs have to testify and face cross-examination, imagine the number of people that tell you, don't push so hard, don't be so aggressive, don't try that. Think about what your long-term outcome would be for you in doing that and taking on those kinds of cases. And to that, I say, look, I grew up in an environment where I had very little to lose in the sense that I just was chasing this idea that had brought my parents to America. And in many ways, that has really informed my sense of fearlessness and courage because I don't know any different, right? I come from that, it's in my DNA.
Eh, And there are a lot of folks who say they'll stand up for the rule of law as long as it's popular. There are a lot of folks who do that. They put the finger in the air and they look for where the wind is coming from, and for them, that means they're doing the right thing. But what I hear you're saying is that even when it's not been popular, you've been able to stand up and you have stood up for the rule of law, and I thank you for that because I think it's very important for the attorney general of this state not just to take popular positions, but take the unpopular decisions, especially when it impacts the disinherited, the marginalized, the poor, the oppressed. I'm about to sound like a preacher, but this is a podcast that's hosted by a preacher, and it's called Faithful Witness. So sometimes I slip into the faithful witness part of it. In fact, all the time I do. So one of the things that, again, that I'm always impressed by and which really, speaks to my heart about you is the lessons that you've taken from growing up in the cradle of the civil rights movement. And I'm going to keep hitting this because I think it's very important to people to understand this part of your life that you're not new to the game when it comes to standing up for the voiceless. I mean, this is what you've done your entire career. And I have a lot of folks who listen to this who are members of faith communities, and they always want to understand how can they as people of faith influence democracy and actually I'll set this question up a little differently as well. In Texas recently, their state board of education, their equivalent of Colorado State Board of Education, recently voted to change their curriculum to teach the Bible in schools and to change the curriculum to say that, and I'm going to have a longer podcast on this later next week, I think, and to change their curriculum to say that Islam is a violent religion. So, from your perspective as the state's chief law enforcement officer, What how do you plan to protect the freedom of religion in this state? Because Colorado is a hotbed for some of this craziness as well, of folks who think that we're a super Christian nationalist country in a super Christian nationalist state. And I think it's important for folks who are in positions of influence and protect the rule of law to actually have some opinion on this in some regard.
So there's a lot there in that question, and I feel like we could have like a multi-hour long conversation about it, but just a few initial thoughts. Having grown up in the cradle of the civil rights movement, the connection between the civil rights movement and houses of worship is, of course, something that was known to me from a very, very young age. And I spent my childhood in a lot of different houses of worship, but to include churches and specifically Black churches that welcomed immigrant communities like mine, right? Whether it was through English language sessions, other ministerial or service work, and things like that. It cannot be understated how much our houses of worship, whether they're churches, mosques, synagogues, or temples, end up doing important community based work that actually keeps us cohesive. And that's why what Texas and their Department of Education is doing right now is really, really troubling. And so, more broadly, though, I will tell you that, one of the things that I learned about really early on in terms of houses of worship was the importance connection between service and faith because and I think you and I may have talked about this before. It's interesting in the word Hindi, in Hindi, the word seva means both prayer, but it also means service. And I think that's a broader reflection of what it means to be a person of faith and to exercise faith and to be in spaces of faith. It's just another way to perform service for your community, right? And so that's why I think that as whoever, right, whatever our public leaders do, they have to protect those spaces for faith based communities to be able to exercise their religion and to be able to worship freely and to not be discriminated against and to not be targeted on the basis of that religion. And that's something that the Attorney General very much has a role to play. Certainly, as an assistant U.S. attorney, part of my work was around protecting houses of worship and investigating and really raising awareness around hate crimes and bias motivated crimes. But for a long time, that meant making sure that our different houses of worship in Colorado had access to active shooter protocols and plans with the FBI, for example. Just really sad circumstances, right, that our houses of worship faced. And so I view the role of the Attorney General and the state's top law enforcement officer as being someone who protects all communities of faith from being to be able to exercise their religion freely.
Thank you. And I will say amen to every single word of that. I will say that I think Hetal, may have been a Baptist preacher in another life because when she came to the Ministerial Alliance several months ago, she blew us all away with her passion and her commitment, which is one of the reasons the Greater Metro Denver Ministerial Alliance endorsed Hetal for Attorney General, because we could see her passion, we could see her heart for all of the people. And I'm going to write down that Hindi word. It might make its way into one of my sermons one day because it theologically it makes sense and it gets to the heart of why we pray. So thank you for educating me. I always like when I get educated. It's fun. So
Well, it's
where
rare that we have the opportunity to educate you. So I'm feeling really excited that it's the word seva, SEVA. And I will tell you that no matter how hard I may try to walk in Terrance Carroll's footsteps in terms of inspiring people, I am just learning from you, sir. So there you go.
more. Just kidding.
Well,
So
like one of the things that we've talked about, if I may,
oh yeah,
you know, we actually met long before this race, and it was in connection with the Colorado Women's Foundation. And I was incredibly honored and very lucky to be recognized as one of the Raising the Bard award recipients maybe a couple of years ago. And I chose to dedicate my remarks and focus my remarks that night around the question of civil rights, right, and connection to immigration in particular, what that means in terms of chasing the American dream. And so something that I think is really interesting that not a lot of people know is that the reason that families like mine were able to come to America is because the civil rights movement and leaders like Dr. King and John Lewis and others, right? they fought as part of the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act legislation for a change to American immigration, which historically had had a national origin system where the majority of immigrants that came to America were from Western Europe. And this idea that we needed a richness in terms of the experience of those who could come to America, right, and contribute meaningfully and positively in service of being American is how that national origin system was then abolished and immigration opened up to other parts of the world. The people we have to thank for that are Black civil rights leaders. And so the connection between communities of faith that were leading the civil rights movement, Black civil rights leaders, and then immigrants from whether it's Asia or Africa or South America are really tied together in ways that are incredibly interesting. The law that changed that is something called the Hart-Celler Act. And that was part of the package of laws that were passed during the civil rights movement, which I think is emblematic of the broader conversation we are having about how all of these issues are actually tied together.
And what most folks don't realize in terms of the historical relationship between immigrants from India and the Black community is that when many Indian immigrants came here, especially the academics, they couldn't get jobs in white institutions. So a lot of historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, actually hired these incredibly smart folks to work on their campuses and rented out rooms and houses to them in the Black community because other communities within the South and in other parts of the country would not allow Indian immigrants to live in quote unquote white communities. But the Black community with open arms said, come on, y'all, come have some grits, come have some shrimp, come have some, pig feet. No, well, maybe not pig feet, but
No, you're
come.
exactly right. You're exactly right. And that's why there are a couple of reasons why the Indian immigrant diaspora ended up in places like Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia. Some of it for the professionals, like those were the places, if there were doctors, for example, that were immigrating from India, those were the communities where there was a need and an interest and an openness to having them work in that way. But but exactly as you say, for professors, they faced a really strong barrier to entry in terms of being able to teach in the educational environment. And so it was HBCUs that opened them with welcome arms. And the food, like this could be its own podcast talking about the connections between food in the Deep South, in the Black community, and Indian food, and all of the spices and the ways that we've connected. And it's especially interesting for families like mine. I grew up a vegetarian, right? And so a lot of people are surprised by the fact that there is so much overlap and connection in terms of food preparation and style and flavor, and yet there is.
Yeah, you haven't lived until you've had barbecue shawarma. Not sure if that's really a thing, but I think I should make it a thing.
You
You
should
know,
make it a thing.
I should
Or
make
you
it a
haven't
thing.
lived until you've had a deviled egg with some masala on it. That's all I'm saying. Some potato salad or deviled egg with masala. It's a jam.
Tell your mom I'll be coming to Birmingham at some point, and I'll be, like, expecting, devil's egg with some masala on it. I'm just saying. They might
I'm
not
just
even know
You should wear stretchy pants for that journey. That's all I'll say.
they won't even know I'm in town. I'm just gonna knock on their door randomly, "Hey, Doshis, what up?" That's what I'm gonna
Yeah,
say.
unfortunately, they're gonna show you all of the dance recital videos and, like, trophies because, proud parents and whatnot, but that's the price of admission for the best korma of your life.
And we'll do a special podcast episode from there featuring the Doshis and show all the childhood pictures of Hetal on the
They would
thing.
love that. They would love that.
We will do that. This is, sometimes, on this podcast, we just have fun and we go off the rails just a little bit. This was an off the rails moment, but a much important off the rails moment is I think, folks who represent us should be real humans. There's a test that some politicians and operatives used to talk about. Folks will always vote for the person that they think they can have a beer with or have them sitting at their dining room table and just chatting like normal folks. And I personally think that Heddle's one of those people that you can just sit at the dining room table or the kitchen table and just talk about things and have a beer. Or if you don't drink a beer, have some sweet tea or some lemonade or just a seltzer water and whatever floats your boat. But if you ever meet her in person, she's just that down to earth and really genuinely cares about people, which is one of the reasons I support her. I know a lot of politicians. I was in politics for a long time, and she's a rock star and a real down to earth human being who I adore immensely. So I'm just happy that I'm her friend now. So we
Well,
only have a few.
I was
It's
gonna
all
say
true.
that's real sweet, but you know that like the combination of an Indian mama and a Southern mama, you better keep it humble, right?
Yeah, true, true. Absolutely. So we're about to run out of time, but I wanted to give Hetal an opportunity to give us her final pitch because folks are going to see this the day before Election Day. So tell us what you got to say.
Closing arguments are tough, Speaker Carroll. I've been giving them for many years in court, but this is probably the most important closing that I will ever give in terms of this moment and what's going to happen tomorrow. So let me say this. I think that the folks that listen to The Faithful Witness probably have a deep sense and appreciation for what's at stake in this moment and how much it matters. And so I would commend all of you to look at all of the candidates' background, experience, all of our track records, and what we have delivered. But what I want to share with all of you today is something that I shared at the Denver Justice Project recent candidate forum that was co hosted with a number of incredible community based organizations. And it is this, which is to say, there's a philosopher that Ram Dass who once said that all of life's journey is walking each other home, right? That's what we're all trying to do on our best day and our worst days, that we are trying to walk each other home. In this moment, it is weird to think about the fact that the attorney general for the state is someone who can walk us home to keep us safe, to maintain our sense of community and safety and sanity and all of those things. But that's why I am running for this job. I am not someone who sought out politics in a political role. I never thought I was going to run for office for a lot of different reasons. But I feel in my bones that that safety that we are seeking when we are walking each other home is very much at risk today. Whether it's our physical safety and being free from the type of religious or racial discrimination that we've talked about today, whether it's our economic safety and being able to have housing, healthcare, and food, whether it's our safety for our kids that are going to school and worried about active shooter drills as opposed to math drills, safety is top of mind in this moment. And so, my pitch to all of you is to number one, get out and vote tomorrow. We are fighting hard to protect our right to vote, facing an administration that is doing everything they can to disenfranchise us, right? But importantly, remember that your vote reflects your values. And so, I have the right experience and judgment and background and leadership skills to take on this administration, to take on anyone that comes for the people of Colorado. But the messenger that handles those fights also matters. And so it would be my privilege and honor as a first generation American, as a person with my story, to be the one that when Donald Trump comes to Colorado and says, you know, we're coming for your way of life, your freedoms, your liberty, it would be my privilege and honor to be the person that gets to say, we'll see you in court.
Thank you very much, Hetal, for joining us on the Faithful Witness with Terrance Carroll podcast. I hope that all of you understand, have seen during the last few minutes why I believe in Hetal and why I believe she should be the next Attorney General of the state. And I also want to thank you all for continuing to watch and support this podcast. Tell your friends, like, subscribe, and remember to tell the truth, seek justice, love the people. This is Faithful Witness.